What if I told you that one of the most disturbing experiments in American history did not reveal how evil a few people can become, but how fragile every human being really is? In 1971, a group of ordinary college students walked into the basement of Stanford University, expecting to participate in a harmless psychology experiment. 6 days later, some of them were emotionally shattered. Others had transformed into something darker, cruel, controlling, humiliating. And the most terrifying part? None of them were trained to become that way. Nobody forced them, nobody brainwashed them. The darkness surfaced naturally. That should disturb you, because modern society loves telling people that humanity is basically good, that evil only exists in dictators, serial killers, or monsters from history books. But the Stanford Prison Experiment exposed something scripture warned about thousands of years ago. There is something broken inside mankind itself, something hidden beneath civilization, beneath manners, beneath education, beneath smiles, and under the right conditions, it rises fast. The year was 1971. America was already under pressure. Vietnam, political unrest, distrust in authority, cultural rebellion, everything felt unstable. And into that unstable atmosphere stepped a psychology professor named Philip Zimbardo. He wanted to answer a question. Do prisons create brutality, or do brutal people create prisons? So he created an experiment, a fake prison built beneath Stanford University. Young male college students answered newspaper ads offering payment to participate. The students were psychologically evaluated beforehand. Healthy, normal, no criminal records, no diagnosed mental illness, average young men. That detail matters, because if the experiment had used unstable individuals, the results would not have shocked the world. But these were ordinary students, the kind of people you pass every day at grocery stores, churches, schools, and workplaces. And that's what makes this story terrifying. The students were randomly divided into two groups, guards and prisoners. That's it. A coin flip of authority. One group would enforce rules, the other would obey. Simple, temporary, controlled. At least, that was the plan. But almost immediately, the atmosphere changed. The prisoners were arrested unexpectedly at their homes by actual police officers cooperating with the experiment. Think about that. The humiliation started before they even entered the fake prison. Handcuffed, searched, read their rights, driven away in police cars while neighbors watched. And once they arrived at the basement prison, their identities began disappearing piece by piece. Their names were removed. They became numbers. They wore identical smocks, rubber sandals, caps designed to simulate shaved heads, chains around their ankle. The experiment was stripping away individuality. Because systems of control understand something ancient. If you erase identity, people become easier to dominate. History proves this over and over again. Prison camps, military indoctrination, authoritarian regimes, cults, gang structures, even online mob culture. Once identity dissolves into a role, people begin changing. The guards experienced transformation too. They wore uniforms, mirrored sunglasses, carried clubs, and almost instantly the role began feeding something inside them. At first, it looked harmless, a little overconfidence, a little swagger, some jokes, but power is addictive, especially unchallenged power. And within hours, some guards started becoming aggressive, not because they were ordered to, not because researchers demanded cruelty, because something inside them responded to authority itself. That's the frightening part. Cruelty emerged organically. One guard became especially notorious for psychological abuse, humiliation, intimidation, control tactics. Years later, people would ask him why he behaved that way. And his answer remains one of the most chilling statements connected to the experiment. I was surprised myself. That sentence reveals something horrifying about human nature. Most people do not truly know what they are capable of until conditions allow it. The Bible warned about this long ago. Jeremiah 17, verse 9, King James Version. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Notice the wording, desperately wicked. That is not flattering language. It destroys modern fantasies about humanity being naturally pure and enlightened. Scripture says the human heart is deceptive, not just occasionally flawed, dangerously deceptive, meaning people can convince themselves they are righteous even while participating in evil. And that is exactly what happened in the Stanford Prison Experiment. The guards began justifying cruelty as maintaining order. Think about how often history repeats that phrase: maintaining order, protecting stability, keeping people safe. Those words have been used to justify some of history's darkest moments. Meanwhile, the prisoners began mentally deteriorating. Some stopped resisting entirely, others broke emotionally. One prisoner suffered such an intense emotional collapse that researchers had to remove him from the experiment early. And remember, this happened in less than 2 days, less than 48 hours. That should terrify anyone who believes the human mind is unshakable. Modern culture tells people they are mentally strong because they post confidence online, because they memorize motivational slogans, because they project toughness. But strip away freedom, strip away dignity, strip away identity, and the mind can unravel quickly. Human beings are far more fragile than they want to believe, and that fragility creates dangerous opportunities for systems of control. One of the most disturbing aspects of the experiment was how quickly the prisoners accepted psychological defeat. Not all of them physically resisted. Many adapted, submitted, internalized the role. Why? Because human beings are social creatures deeply influenced by environment. Most people underestimate how much surroundings shape behavior. That's why entire nations can slowly normalize corruption. That's why populations can become desensitized to evil over time. Not all at once, gradually. One compromise at a time, one surrender at a time, one rationalization at a time. The Stanford Prison Experiment became a compressed version of human history itself. Power, submission, humiliation, control, fear, obedience, psychological conditioning. It was all there, in one basement, in 6 days. And perhaps the most frightening detail of all, Philip Zimbardo himself became psychologically absorbed into the system. The researcher stopped acting like an objective observer. He began acting like a prison superintendent. Even he lost perspective. Even he became trapped inside the roles. That is deeply important because systems influence leaders too. Authority changes people, sometimes slowly, sometimes instantly. History is full of leaders who began with good intentions and ended in corruption because power exposes weaknesses already hiding inside the heart. Romans 3:10-12, King James Version. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none that understandeth, there is none that seeketh after God. They are all gone out of the way, they are together become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. That scripture destroys human pride. None righteous, not one. And before people get defensive, remember this: the Stanford Prison Experiment did not reveal evil in one political party, one race, one religion, one nation. It revealed the universal weakness of fallen humanity. Everyone wants to imagine they would be the hero during dark times in history, but history says otherwise. Most people adapt to systems around them. Most people conform. Most people rationalize. And under pressure, many people participate in things they once believed they never would. That realization is deeply uncomfortable, which is why many people avoid thinking about this experiment too deeply. Because if ordinary students could descend into psychological cruelty in under a week, what does that say about humanity as a whole? The answer is uncomfortable. Civilization is thinner than people think. Very thin, a layer, a mask, a social agreement, and beneath it lives the constant battle between morality and corruption. The Bible never romanticizes human nature. Modern entertainment does. Modern self-help culture does. Scripture doesn't. The Bible repeatedly warns that humanity without God drifts toward darkness. Not because humans lack intelligence, but because intelligence without righteousness becomes dangerous. People often assume evil announces itself loudly. Sometimes it does, but often evil appears ordinary, administrative, structured, official, clean, professional. The Stanford Prison Experiment revealed how easily human beings can become desensitized to suffering once authority normalizes it. And that truth stretches far beyond one university basement. It touches governments, corporations, religious institutions, online culture. Everywhere power exists. The guards in the experiment began escalating cruelty because nobody stopped them early. That's important. Unchecked power grows, always. History confirms it repeatedly. And perhaps the most sobering reality is this: many people do not become cruel because they enjoy evil. They become cruel because systems reward conformity. That's what happened in the experiment. The guards adapted to expectations, the prisoners adapted to oppression, and both sides slowly lost touch with reality. Sound familiar? Because entire societies can drift into the same condition. People stop asking questions, stop resisting, stop thinking critically, stop recognizing evil because it becomes culturally normalized. That is one reason Scripture constantly warns believers to stay spiritually awake. Romans 12, verse 2, King James Version, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Conformed. That word matters, because conformity is powerful. The Stanford experiment proved how quickly people mold themselves around systems, but Scripture commands believers not to conform blindly. Why? Because crowds can be wrong, systems can become corrupt, authority can become abusive, and human beings can drift into darkness faster than they imagine. The experiment finally ended after 6 days. Not because the prisoners escaped, because outside observers were horrified by what they witnessed. The emotional damage was becoming severe. Reality itself was blurring. The lines between role play and reality had nearly vanished. And maybe that is the darkest truth behind the Stanford Prison Experiment. The prison was fake, but the suffering wasn't, the cruelty wasn't, the fear wasn't, the psychological collapse wasn't. Those things were real, very real. And the experiment became one of the most disturbing demonstrations of human vulnerability ever recorded. But spiritually, the story goes even deeper. Because according to Scripture, humanity is trapped in another prison entirely. A prison of sin, pride, fear, hatred, self-deception, spiritual blindness. Jesus said in John 8:34-36, King James Version, Jesus answered them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. And the servant abideth not in the house forever, but the Son abideth ever. If the Son therefore shall make you free, ye shall be free indeed. Free indeed. Not temporary freedom, not political freedom, not emotional escape. Real freedom. Because external prisons are not humanity's greatest problem, internal corruption is. The Stanford Prison Experiment revealed what happens when flawed human beings are handed unchecked authority. Scripture explains why that darkness exists in the first place. And without spiritual transformation, history repeats itself endlessly. Different uniforms, different governments, different slogans, same fallen nature. That is why every generation eventually shocks itself. Every generation believes it is morally superior to the last, and eventually every generation discovers its own capacity for darkness. The Stanford Prison Experiment was not just psychology, it was a warning, a mirror, a glimpse into how quickly humanity can drift once accountability disappears. And maybe the most haunting realization of all is this. If you had walked into that basement in 1971, you probably would not know which role you would become either. Guard or prisoner.